On today's episode of SNHU Explains, we're talking to Chris Couture. Chris is the Assistant Director of Training for Student Financial Services here at SNHU. And today he will cover changes coming to the FAFSA Simplification Act, the difference between a subsidized and unsubsidized loan, and so much more. So stay tuned. So we're going to start off super easy. Can you introduce yourself and your role here at SNHU?
Hi, my name is Chris Couture. I'm the Assistant Director of Training for Student Financial Services here at Southern New Hampshire University.
Hi, Chris. Great to meet you. So how long have you been with SNHU?
Coming up on 8.5 years. I started in April of 2015.
Awesome. So a long time.
Yeah, quite some time. It's been a journey for sure.
Is there a reason, sorry, it's kind of off topic, but is there a reason you stayed so long? What has kept you at SNHU?
I was mostly a restaurant worker for my entire life. I love the busyness. I love how much energy is involved in that work. But I was always searching for something a little more stable, which is why I came to SNHU and found a more traditional 9-to-5, Monday to Friday job. The reason I stayed, however, is because I found something that I could truly dive into, be passionate about, and really feel good about at the end of the day as well.
We talk to a lot of people that work here, and it's all kind of the same sentiment. The passion they have for the work at SNHU is pretty incredible, and I think it's sort of rare for an institution that people are that passionate about it. But jumping into today's topic, we're going to talk about the FAFSA and student loans, which is always a big topic in the news. And to start off, I'm hearing there's some big changes to the FAFSA. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. Part of the FAFSA simplification project, it's the biggest, most sweeping changes the Department of Education has ever done to the free application for federal student aid. They're reducing it from over 100 questions down to roughly 38 questions that students and parents will have to complete in order to become eligible for federal student aid.
So what can people do to prepare for the FAFSA?
That's a great question. The biggest thing is just to try to take some time, make sure you have about 30 to 45 minutes to sit down and complete it. Some of the changes will require students and parents to transfer their information from the IRS to the Department of Education. And that's a huge change that wasn't present on prior years. That used to be optional, and now it's mandatory in order to be eligible.
So in a couple sentences or so, how would you explain the FAFSA Simplification Act to someone who's never heard of it before? Because I find personally that when it comes to student loans, financial aid, it's very complicated. So could you kind of explain that to us?
Absolutely. The FAFSA Simplification Act is trying to trim down the amount of information that parents and students need to provide on the FAFSA in order to become eligible. The biggest changes are just the reducing the amount of questions that they have to answer in order to be eligible. You're very correct, though. Financial aid and eligibility for financial aid is extremely complex. To kind of go back to why I'm passionate about this work, I really love helping people understand things that can be complicated, and that's why Student Financial Services exists.
So you're on the Student Financial Services team, and when we were talking to you yesterday, you were talking a little bit about your team's North Star initiatives, and I found it pretty powerful how you said you want students, when they leave college, to come out in a better financial position than when they went in, which seems pretty rare. Can you talk about that a little bit?
It's a lofty goal to have people come into a university, potentially incur tens of thousands of dollars worth of debt to get a degree, but also want them to leave in a better financial position than when they started. Part of that is just the power of education and getting a degree itself. The other part of that is the education that we try to provide in student financial services about the loans that they could be taking on, how to navigate their tuition without incurring all the debt they possibly could. And even just finding ways that they could pay down their debt in other ways, whether that's through regular repayments of interest or trying to find other benefits such as employer reimbursement, tuition discounts that we offer through our partners.
And so what advice would you give someone who is thinking about signing up for financial aid to fund their college education, but they don't really know where to start?
The first advice I'd give is to call into Student Financial Services itself and chat with a finance counselor. Our team has been specifically trained to try to understand this very confusing topic of financial aid, and we're always here to educate our students. So I really like to think that the education we provide is not only with the classes and the degrees that they get, but for SFS specifically, it's the knowledge of loans and how to navigate that potentially tricky situation.
Yeah, I think one thing that people are concerned about in general when it comes to online education is that there'll be kind of a number in the system and that there's not a face to the name of SNHU. And it seems like your team, people can get in contact with you really easily.
Really, we are just people trying to help other people. And that's something that's really unique. I know we have a lot of students. We also have a lot of staff standing by to answer questions. We do everything that we can to try to connect and understand our students' situation because we're all unique and different, whether that's the reason that we're going to college in the first place, the degree that we're trying to get and what we're doing with it, and even the journey that we've taken to get here in the first place. Some people have a lot of knowledge of finances and financial aid. Other people have never heard of it ever. But that's why we're here, to kind of demystify that.
So I'm going to kind of switch topics a little bit because this article came out recently that said nearly 9 million borrowers missed their first student loan payment after the pandemic-related pause. Why do you think that is?
That's a massive number. I think it's difficult because for a lot of the pandemic, our minds were very occupied. So kind of out of sight, out of mind, weren't thinking about paying down their loans. I think it's just difficult because sometimes we don't want to focus on the difficult conversations. We don't want to focus on finances. But at the end of the day, it's extremely important. There's no such thing as really delaying that. It's more just delaying the inevitable. And that's a tough situation because I know that there's a lot of priorities when it comes to how we spend our money, and paying off debt might not be the first choice. But it's really not about us right now. It's about our future selves and how we can set ourselves up for success and our families.
Borrowers who missed payments between now and 2024, they won't be reported as delinquent. However, interest will continue to accrue. Can you talk about forbearance and interest? I know, was this the topic we were talking about earlier where you said there was a little bit of a change from what you said yesterday?
There have been a couple big changes put through by the Department of Education. I think that repayment, deferment, and forbearance periods are just misunderstood overall. When you're in school, your loans will go into an in-school deferment, which means that you're not required to make payments on those loans. However, it doesn't mean that it's not beneficial to do so. If you pay off your interest payments, even if they're not actively accruing, you can write that off on your taxes. It's tax deductible. So that itself is a good reason. Also, just paying off your principal amount, which is the initial amount of your loan, that's how interest accrues. So if you borrow $100,000, your percentage of interest accrual will go against that $100,000. And that's where we get the snowball effect that we often hear from people. And it can become insurmountable if you wait too long.
Yeah, that's definitely something that is good to know. I don't think people realized that interest was still gathering even when loans are in forbearance. Like that was something I didn't know. So it's definitely something that people should be aware of.
And to clarify, there's two different loans that students typically get through the FAFSA. One is a subsidized loan and one is an unsubsidized loan. The subsidized means that when you're in school, an in-school deferment, the interest won't actively accrue because the Department of Education will pay that on your behalf. But unsubsidized loans, they'll always accrue interest from the day they disperse.
$132 billion of student loan debt has been canceled through the existing student loan forgiveness program. What makes somebody eligible to get debt canceled?
So the student loan forgiveness program, although a great program, can be very tricky to navigate. You have to be eligible and you have to remain eligible for 10 years in order to even get that as a possibility. Some of it depends on your work, if you work for a nonprofit. But you also have to make regular on-time payments and not break that. If you do and you kind of step out of that agreed payment, you could lose your eligibility completely. And the program itself keeps evolving and changing, which means that just because you started working towards that in 10 years, it might not exist or it might look completely different. So that's why, even though it is a good opportunity, I always suggest to focus on now so that way in the future, you're better set up for success rather than hoping that things do work out like we want.
That is all the questions I had, but do you have anything else you kind of would like to get across?
I guess really financial aid is a very confusing topic. I've worked in financial aid for over 8 years since I began at SNHU. When I was younger, I did apply for financial aid using a FAFSA, but I did not understand it. So many people that even come here to work as finance counselors or work in student financial services, they didn't understand it before they start with us. But we spend a lot of time trying to understand it, break it down, and kind of translate it into a way that's more understandable by our students. So I really think that we're a great service, and the toughest part can just be taking the time to give us a call.
Yeah, and how can students reach you?
They can reach us in a multitude of ways. We're always available via email. We do have text and chat services that we now operate with in order to answer students' questions whenever they're available. And we have phone lines that are open from 8 a.m. Eastern Time all the way to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. We have limited availability on the weekends, but for most of every day during the week, we are here to answer questions.
How is SNHU different from other universities when it comes to cost?
I think that SNHU is different from other universities when it comes to cost because we truly try to break it down and make it helpful for the student. We have a variety of different terms throughout the year in which you can start, and the cost of tuition is one of the lowest that you'll find per credit hour in the country, especially for a fully accredited university. I think one thing that's important to note is just having that conversation and understanding the financial aid that you're borrowing, because you don't always have to take loans. And even when you're offered financial aid, you don't have to take everything that you're offered. I think that's a huge misunderstanding from a lot of students in the country. They will receive their offer letter and say, this is what I'm eligible for. So they'll just sign and say, I want it all. Fun fact, or maybe not so fun, is that if you borrow the full eligibility that you're provided per term, and you only take one class per term here, you won't be able to graduate without running out of your full eligibility for federal student aid. They have a lifetime limit the Department of Education puts on these loans. And if you take everything that you possibly can, you will probably be about 3 or 4 classes short before you graduate. So not only is it important to understand, but it's also important to only borrow what you need. And that's power that our students have that they may not know if they don't give us a call, or if they don't read some of the materials that's available by the Department of Education.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer because like we said earlier in this episode, it's a lot of people don't really understand, first of all, just finances in general, but especially student loans. So just knowing this information and knowing that you don't necessarily have to borrow as much as you think is great to know.
I mean, people don't understand finances because they're scary. But if you really take time to dive in with someone's help, that's what's really going to unlock it. And little things, you might not have to deny or cancel your loans, but even if you just take a little bit less every time, you'll be better off. And this is one of the rare instances where people borrow much more than they actually need to pay. You don't go to buy a car and borrow $100,000 to buy a $40,000 vehicle. So why would you go to college and borrow $50,000 to pay for $38,000 worth of tuition? It's just because most people don't know.
Well, it's great now that we have you, and thank you so much for joining us. We'll have to talk to you again soon because this topic's never going to go away. It's always going to be important.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Christian.